They said her name only once before the dust swallowed it. Asha. She was 17, her wrists wrapped in fibers of dried bark, her eyes painted in soot. She stood at the edge of the pit, where the air smelled of rusted iron and damp moss. That smell, always that smell, the smell of damp fear. It clung to the stones, to the hands of those who watched, to the shivering breath of those who had stood there before her. The tribe called it the trial pit, a test of purity, of courage, of obedience. They said the gods would decide who deserved to crawl out, but the truth was simpler, darker. It wasn't about faith at all, it was about control. Asha had laughed once, months before. She told her friend that gods who needed pits weren't gods worth kneeling to. That whisper spread like rot through the roots of the camp, and when the elders called her name for testing, no one dared look her in the eye. The pit was narrow, carved into the earth like a wound that refused to heal. Beneath its lip, jagged stones jutted from the dirt, slick with rain and blood. Thorns were laid across its base in tangled webs, meant to slow, meant to tear. And at the very bottom, bones. Always bones. Some animal, some human. Impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. The tribe gathered at dawn. The drums began, hollow and cruel. "Strength is survival," the elder chanted, his voice carrying the rhythm of old lies. "Weakness is death. The gods will choose." Asha said nothing. She only stared into the pit, breathing in that damp, suffocating scent. Her father's eyes avoided hers. Her mother's hands were tied to her own mouth, trembling with silence. They threw her in. It wasn't graceful. Her scream cut through the morning like a cracked bell, short and shocked. Bones cracked. Not all hers, not yet. And then there was stillness. The crowd leaned forward, eager, expectant. The pit had rules. No one could speak until the one inside moved. If she moved, she was alive. If she climbed, she was worthy. Minutes passed. Rain began to fall, soft and persistent, seeping into the dirt walls, turning everything slick. And then from below, a sound. Not a scream, not a sob. A scratch. Fingernail scraping stone. The crowd exhaled as one. She was alive. The trial had begun. From above, the women watched in silence. They had all seen it before. Sisters, cousins, daughters disappearing into that hole in the earth. It was tradition, they were told, a purification. What they didn't say aloud was that it was also a warning, a reminder to every woman breathing, your worth begins and ends with your endurance. As Asha climbed, the thorns clawed her legs, the rocks peeled her palms. Her breath echoed up the walls, shallow, rasping. And still, that smell, the damp, earthy fear, grew thicker, heavier, almost alive. Above, the elders murmured, "She climbs too fast." That was dangerous. Too much strength was defiance. Too much willpower was rebellion. They dropped more branches into the pit. The thorns fell like rain, slicing, shredding. Her breath broke into sobs. Her hands slipped. Her body hit the stones again, bones against bones. The crowd gasped, not in pity, but in awe of fate's decision. The pit, they said, had spoken. Yet she rose again, crawling now, half blind, her hair matted with dirt and blood. The walls of the pit gleamed in the faint sunrise, wet and red. Every motion she made was a sermon of pain, of refusal, of something older than their gods. The tribe watched, and for a moment, just a moment, they forgot their script. The elder's voice trembled as he spoke again. "The strong shall crawl out." But even he seemed uncertain. Because deep down, beneath the ritual and the chants, there was a terror the elders never voiced. The fear of what would happen if someone like Asha didn't just crawl out, but climbed out with her eyes open. That, they know, would be the beginning of something uncontrollable. And that's what we uncover here, the real story behind the trial pit, the unspoken laws of fear that bound women for centuries, and the system that called itself divine while feasting on obedience.
They called it tradition, but in truth, it was engineering. A system built from fear, perfected through repetition, justified by myth. The trial pit was no mere hole in the ground. It was a mirror, one that reflected how power preserved itself, century after century, by convincing the powerless that their suffering was sacred. At its heart, the trial pit ritual wasn't about survival. It was about compliance. Asha's tribe, known in the oldest records as the Kareni of the Hollow Valley, lived by a strict hierarchy. Elders ruled, warriors enforced, women endured. Their laws were carved on stone, but their control, that was carved into flesh. Every generation, a handful of young women were chosen for testing. Marriage candidates, daughters of leaders, or those accused of disobedience. Each trial was said to cleanse weakness from the bloodline. Those who survived were celebrated as favored by the gods. Those who didn't were buried inside the pit, unmarked, unnamed, claimed by fate. And fate, they believed, could not be questioned. The elders' motives were simple: control disguised as destiny. The pit was an idea more than a structure. If women could be convinced that pain proved purity, then obedience became virtue. That smell again. The smell of damp fear. It lived in the pit, but it also lived in the people. It lingered on their hands, on their clothing, in their homes. Fear was not only what they breathed, it was what they believed. No one dared challenge the system because the system fed on silence, and silence was survival. Historical fragments found in the valley, bone fragments, carved figurines, and ritual chants etched into clay, show a disturbing precision. The depth of the pit was always the same, 9 cubits, symbolizing the 9 breaths between life and death. The thorns came from a single tree species known for its toxin-laced sap. The victims' wrists were tied not to restrain them, but to mark them. The fiber left a distinct scar, a circle burned into the skin that the elders called the God's Mark. Even the timing of the trial mattered, always at dawn, when shadows were longest, and when the light could not yet reveal what hid at the bottom. Archaeologists once called it a ritual of renewal. But renewal for whom? For the tribe's collective spirit, or for the elders' authority? Because every time the pit was used, the community gathered, united in one shared act of submission, to watch, to chant, to believe. The mechanism of belief was brutal in its elegance. Each survivor became both symbol and warning. When Asha crawled, bleeding, whispering prayers she didn't believe, she wasn't escaping. She was being transformed into a living proof of the elders' law. Her pain became propaganda. And that's how the pit endured, generation after generation. Imagine it, a society where suffering becomes currency and endurance is the only language of worth. Where mothers teach their daughters not to cry, not because they are strong, but because their tears have already been punished by centuries of ritual. The trial pit was a stage, and every victim was an actress forced to perform strength so the powerful could pretend to bless her. The psychological effect was staggering. Survivors often refused to speak afterward. Their eyes, witnesses said, became distant, as if the pit had taken more than flesh, as if it had reached inside and stolen something invisible. The elders called that emptiness peace. But in the old oral songs, buried beneath generations of censorship, the women gave it another name: hollowing. To be hollowed was to be silenced from within, to feel the weight of survival and know it served someone else's story. And so the pit became eternal, not through stone nor soil, but through memory. Each generation inherited not only the rules, but the smell, that same damp, clinging scent of fear that no one could wash away. You see, cruelty doesn't just survive in rituals like the trial pit. It survives in ideas. The ones that tell us obedience is sacred and endurance is beauty. And that's where the story takes its darkest turn. Because one day, one woman decided to crawl out, not to prove her faith, but to destroy it. When Asha clawed her way out of the pit, she was no longer the girl they had thrown in. Her body was a map of wounds. Every cut, every bruise, every drop of blood, another line in the story she would never be allowed to tell. The tribe cheered, at first. The elders lifted their hands toward the sun, chanting words that sounded holy but hid the stench of control. The gods have chosen, they shouted. The girl has returned reborn. But she wasn't reborn. She was watching how they smiled at her pain, how they feasted while her hands still trembled, how they called her strength divine when it was only defiance. That smell, the damp, rotting scent of the pit, clung to her even as she stood among them. It followed her like a ghost. Some said it meant she had carried the spirit of the pit with her. Others whispered she had tricked fate itself. And that was dangerous. Because Asha did what no one before her had dared. She spoke. Her first words came 3 days later when the drums began again. A new girl had been chosen. The crowd gathered around the edge of the pit, the same chants, the same rules. But before the elder could raise his staff, Asha stepped forward. No more. Just 2 words, and the air changed. No one moved. Even the forest seemed to hold its breath. The elder stared at her, his face carved in disbelief. You would defy the gods? He asked. Asha's voice cracked, but her gaze didn't waver. I met your gods, she said. They live in dark. They smell of fear. That moment, that single defiance was enough to fracture centuries of silence. The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't gasp. They simply waited, because every person standing there, deep down, had known the truth all along. They had all smelt it, that same damp, inescapable fear, and finally, someone had named it. The eldest struck her, once, twice. His staff split her lip, but she didn't fall. Throw her back in, he commanded. But when the guards approached, something happened that no one expected. One woman, old, trembling, wrapped in animal hide, stepped forward and stood beside Asha. Then another, then another. Within moments, half of the women of the tribe were standing in front of the pit, silent, eyes steady, no chants, no prayers, just a quiet sound of breath, heavy, human, unafraid. The elder's command broke into stuttering rage. You would betray your blood, you would curse your people. But the women didn't move, and for the first time in generations, the pit lay open, unfilled. That night, flames consumed the elder's hut. No one confessed. No one needed to. The trial pit was abandoned, sealed with stones and ash. Yet history is not kind to rebellion. The story of Asha was buried by her own people. Later, the chronicles of nearby tribes described her as a heretic, a deceiver, a woman possessed by the smell of the dead. And yet, centuries later, when archaeologists unearthed the Hollow Valley, they found something impossible. Among the bones at the base of the pit, a single carving etched into the stone wall. Asha lives. What followed was worse, because the scholars discovered evidence that the pit had been reopened long after Asha's rebellion. Perhaps not by the same tribe, perhaps not even in the same land, but the ritual had spread across continents, across generations. In one region, it became the Cave of Brides, in another, the Hollow of Loyalty, always the same core. Women tested, purity measured by pain, survival mistaken for sanctity. As if cruelty itself had learned to adapt, hiding behind culture, faith, and duty. And the smell, that ancient dampness, still lingers in the soil of those places. It's in the clay, in the ruins, in the unmarked graves where nameless bones still wait to be remembered. The true horror isn't that Asha was thrown into the pit. It's that the world kept digging new ones long after her bones turned to dust. Because once a society learns,
centuries have passed, yet the echo of that pit, the echo of damp fear, still lingers. It hums beneath the surface of our world, soft, almost imperceptible, but always there. You can hear it in the rituals we still justify, in the punishments we still disguise as tradition, in the systems that still decide who is worthy to crawl out and who is not. The trial pit was never buried. It evolved. It moved from earth to ideology, from tribal chants to legal codes, from thorn branches to social norms. And every time we tell someone their pain is noble, every time obedience is dressed up as honor, every time silence is called grace, the pit breathes again. The archaeologists who uncovered Hollow Valley described it clinically, a ritual site of selective endurance. But the women who live today, in towns and schools and homes where expectation cuts deeper than stone, they know that description by heart. They live it. They smell it. That same damp scent of fear, not from soil, but from survival. Asha's name survives only in fragments, local folklore, forbidden songs, etched prayers carried in secret from mother to daughter. In one surviving verse, the words are almost gone, but one line remains intact. If I crawl out, I crawl for all. It's strange, isn't it, how defiance becomes myth and myth becomes caution. Asha was condemned for disobedience, yet centuries later her ghost is invoked as proof that even systems built on suffering can fracture when someone refuses to kneel. But perhaps the darkest truth of all is this: the pit didn't die because it was destroyed, it died because it was remembered, exposed, spoken aloud. The act of telling her story was itself a rebellion. That's what the elders feared most, not her strength, but her voice. And that is where the cruelty of history meets the cruelty of now, because silence, even today, is rewarded more often than truth. In some remote cultures, women are still made to undergo tests for purity or endurance, rituals claimed to be sacred, but built on the same logic as the trial pit. And though the tools have changed, the knives replaced by words, the pits replaced by institutions, the purpose remains the same: to measure submission, not strength. And that smell, you can almost imagine it, seeping through time, through generations, reminding us that fear is not an ancient relic. It's alive. It's woven into our modern myths. The myth of the perfect woman, the obedient daughter, the silent survivor. Asha's story isn't a ghost tale. It's a reflection of how easily cruelty masquerades as ceremony and how belief can become a weapon sharper than any blade. We began with her fall, but we end with her crawl. That moment when a girl clawed her way through blood and thorns, not for glory, not for faith, but for something the tribe could never understand: choice. And so we ask, what pits do we still build? What rituals do we still defend? Who are we still throwing in while calling it tradition, calling it destiny, calling it good? The trial pit was never about the gods. It was about power pretending to be divine. And maybe the only true act of faith is refusing to kneel before cruelty disguised as holiness. That's the heart of the Crimson Archive: to exhume what was buried, to unmask what was sanctified, to whisper the stories they tried to silence. Because if Asha's story survives even now, it means one thing: the pit didn't win. And neither will silence. If this story unsettled you, if it made you see the ancient machinery still turning in the dark corners of belief, stay with us. Subscribe to Crimson Archive, because next time we go deeper into another ritual, another deception, another truth clawing its way out of history's pit. Until then, remember this: the smell of damn fear is eternal, unless someone dares to name it.